The Galactic Concord had kept peace among the stars for 6,000 years. 1,200 worlds lived under its protection. War was something that existed only in old books and dusty archives. The elder species had evolved past violence long ago, or so they believed. They had built a civilization based on trade, diplomacy, and the shared belief that all conflicts could be solved with words. When humanity first reached the stars, the Concord watched them with great interest. Here was a young species, barely out of their solar system, with a history soaked in blood. The elder races studied human wars with a mix of horror and fascination. World wars, civil wars, wars fought over religion, land, resources, and ideas. No other species in the Concord had such a violent past. Many believed humans would destroy themselves before they could join the galactic community. But humanity surprised them. The humans wanted peace. They had seen enough war on their own world. They had built weapons that could end all life on their planet, and they had chosen not to use them. When the Concord offered membership, humanity accepted with open arms. The price of joining was simple. Humanity had to give up war. They had to dismantle their militaries, destroy their weapons, and embrace the peaceful ways of the Concord. It was a price humanity was willing to pay. Within 3 generations, the transformation was complete. Human children grew up never knowing conflict. They learned that violence was wrong, that it solved nothing, that talking was always better than fighting. The warriors of old became teachers and healers. The generals who once commanded armies now worked as diplomats and mediators. The Concord celebrated humanity's change as its greatest success. They had taken the most violent species in the galaxy and turned them into peaceful citizens. It proved that any race could be civilized, that war was not natural, but a choice that could be unlearned. Humanity became an example for other young species to follow. What the Concord did not understand was that humanity's violence had never been a flaw. It was a survival tool, written into their blood over millions of years. On Earth, only the strong survived. Humanity had clawed their way to the top of the food chain by being smarter and more dangerous than everything else. That instinct did not disappear when they joined the Concord. It simply went to sleep. For 200 years, humanity lived in peace. They spread across dozens of worlds, building colonies and raising families under alien suns. They traded with the elder races, learned from them, and contributed to galactic society. The old days of war faded into myth. Young humans could not imagine their ancestors fighting and killing each other. It seemed impossible, like a bad dream from another life. Then the Vreth came. The Vreth Dominion arrived from the empty space between galaxies, from regions so dark and distant that no one had thought to look there. They were an ancient species, older even than the Concord. The records said they had died out millions of years ago, destroyed in some forgotten war. The records were wrong. The Vreth had not died. They had been waiting, growing, building an empire in the darkness. And now they wanted what the Concord had built. The first attacks came without warning. Border worlds fell silent, their populations vanishing overnight. Scout ships disappeared. Distress signals went unanswered. By the time the Concord understood what was happening, the Vreth had already taken 100 systems. The elder races tried to respond, but they had forgotten how. Their ships were built for trade and exploration, not combat. Their citizens had never held weapons. They sent diplomats to negotiate, but the Vreth killed them without listening. They offered tribute, but the Vreth wanted more than resources. They wanted everything. World after world fell. The Vreth took no prisoners. They did not want allies or servants. They wanted slaves and territory, and they took both with brutal efficiency. The Concord, which had kept peace for 6,000 years, crumbled in months. Humanity watched as the war came closer. They had no weapons to fight with, no soldiers to defend their homes. They had given all of that up long ago, trusting the Concorde to protect them. Now that protection had failed. The first human world to fall was called New Geneva. It was a peaceful colony of 20 million people, known for its universities and research centers. The Vreth fleet arrived at dawn, local time. By sunset, 14 million humans were dead. The survivors were taken as slaves, loaded onto transport ships, and carried away to fates unknown. News of the attack spread across human space. People wept in the streets. Families searched desperately for word of loved ones. Leaders called for calm and urged faith in the Concorde. But the Concorde had no answers. They could not stop the Vreth. They could barely slow them down. On a dozen human worlds, something strange began to happen. Men and women who had never known violence felt something stirring inside them. It was like a voice from deep within, speaking in a language older than words. It whispered of survival. It whispered of strength. It whispered of what their ancestors had known, back when humanity still remembered how to fight. The sleeping giant was waking up, and the galaxy would soon learn that humanity had never truly forgotten what it meant to be human. The attack on New Geneva changed everything. The images spread across human space like wildfire. Cities burning, bodies in the streets, children screaming as they were dragged onto slave ships. Every human with access to a screen saw what the Vreth had done, and something inside them broke. For generations, humans had been taught that violence was wrong. They had learned to solve problems with words, to trust in diplomacy, to believe that peace was always possible. Now they watched their people die, and those lessons felt like lies. The Concorde had promised to protect them. The Concorde had failed. In the ruins of New Geneva's greatest university, a woman named Yuki Tanaka searched through the rubble. She was a scientist who studied ancient cultures, including the history of her own species. Most humans found that history shameful. They did not like to remember the wars and the killing. But Yuki had always been fascinated by it. She wanted to understand how her ancestors had survived in such a violent world. Now, surrounded by death and destruction, she finally understood why I found an old archive that had survived the bombing. Inside were records from before humanity joined the Concorde. Military manuals, battle strategies, weapons designs, documents that described concepts modern humans could barely comprehend. Total war, guerrilla tactics, nuclear deterrence. The words felt strange in her mind, but something deeper recognized them. Her blood remembered what her brain had forgotten. She was not alone. Across human space, others were experiencing the same awakening. A factory worker on Mars found himself sketching designs for weapons he had never seen. A logistics manager on Kepler 442b started organizing supply chains with military precision, though she had never studied warfare. A retired teacher on Earth woke from dreams of ancient battles, his hand shaking with a need he could not name. They called themselves the Rememberers. They did not know how they knew what they knew. It was as if the knowledge had always been there, sleeping in their genes, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Their ancestors had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. That survival instinct had been passed down through thousands of generations. The Concorde had suppressed it. The Vreth had unleashed it. The elder races watched this transformation with growing fear. They had spent generations teaching humanity to be peaceful. They had congratulated themselves on taming the galaxy's most dangerous species. Now that species was changing before their eyes, and the elder races had no idea what would happen next. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin was among the first to fully remember. He had spent his career commanding transport ships, moving goods between colonies. He had never held a weapon in his life. But when news of New Geneva reached him, something shifted in his mind. He looked at his transport fleet and saw not cargo ships, but the skeleton of a navy. He looked at his crew and saw not workers, but soldiers waiting to be trained. Within weeks, Chen had gathered others like himself. Engineers who remembered how to build weapons. Tacticians who remembered how to plan battles. Scientists who remembered how to turn peaceful technology into instruments of war. They worked in secret, hiding their activities from the Concord authorities, who still insisted that violence was not the answer. The first new warship rolled out of a hidden shipyard 6 months after New Geneva fell. It was crude by ancient standards, built from converted civilian vessels and improvised weapons. But it was a warship, the first humanity had built in 200 years. Chun named it Remembrance. More ships followed. Soldiers trained in techniques recovered from old archives and improved with modern technology. Intelligence networks spread through Vreth-occupied space, gathering information and mapping enemy weaknesses. Humanity was rebuilding its capacity for war with terrifying speed. The Concord Council demanded that humanity stop. They cited ancient treaties and laws against militarization. They warned that violence would only make things worse. They threatened sanctions and isolation. Admiral Chun delivered humanity's response in a message broadcast across all frequencies. His voice was calm and steady, but his words carried the weight of a species pushed too far. They had tried peace, he said. They had given up their weapons and trusted others to protect them. And their people had died. Their children had been taken as slaves. Their worlds had burned. The Concord had failed to protect them. So humanity would protect itself. They would no longer ask. Permission to survive. The message ended with a simple statement that sent chills through every species that heard it. Humanity remembered what it was. And humanity was coming. The first human counterattack came without warning. 17 Vreth positions fell in a single day. Supply depots exploded. Communication relays went dark. Patrol ships vanished from sensor screens. The Vreth commanders did not understand what was happening. They had conquered 100 species, and none had fought back like this. Admiral Chun had planned the operation for months. His people had studied the Vreth, learned their patterns, identified their weaknesses. The attacks were not random acts of desperation. They were surgical strikes, designed to cause maximum damage with minimum risk. This was not the wild rage of desperate prey. This was the cold patience of a predator. The human soldiers who carried out these attacks fought with a ferocity that shocked everyone, including themselves. They had trained for months, pushing their bodies and minds past limits they did not know they had. Ancient martial instincts had awakened in their blood, mixing with modern technology to create something the galaxy had never seen before. A young sergeant named Marcus Cole led one of the first ground assaults. He had been a farmer before the war, growing crops on a quiet colony world. Now he moved through the burning remains of a Vreth base, his weapon steady in his hands. He felt no fear. He felt no doubt. He felt only the calm certainty that he was doing what his species had always done. He was surviving. The Vreth had enslaved thousands of humans from captured colonies. When Marcus and his team found the holding cells, they expected to find broken, defeated people. Instead, they found something else. The slaves had organized themselves in secret, passing information through whispered codes, waiting for rescue they were not sure would come. When the human soldiers appeared, the prisoners did not cower. They asked for weapons. Within hours, a force of liberated humans joined the fight. They had no training, no experience, no idea what they were doing. But they had the same fire burning in their blood. They remembered what they were. News of the successful counterattack spread through human space. For the first time since New Geneva, people felt something other than fear. They felt hope. They felt pride. They felt something older and darker that they did not have words for. They felt like humans again. The Concord Council watched these developments with growing alarm. They had expected humanity to negotiate, to find some peaceful solution, to be the civilized species they had worked so hard to create. Instead, humans were fighting with a savagery that reminded the elder races why they had feared this species in the first place. Some council members argued that humanity had become as dangerous as the breath. They suggested intervening, forcing humans to stop fighting before the violence spread further. Others pointed out that humanity was the only species actually pushing back against the invasion. If humans stopped fighting, the breath would eventually reach the core worlds. The debate went in circles while the war continued. Admiral Chun did not wait for the council to reach a decision. His fleet grew larger every month. New ships joined the fight as soon as they left the shipyards. Soldiers who had never imagined holding weapons found themselves on the front lines, fighting for their families and their species. The battles grew larger and more intense. Human forces liberated colony after colony, pushing the Vreth back across systems they had thought securely conquered. The Vreth responded with increased brutality, hoping to break human morale through terror. It had the opposite effect. Every atrocity strengthened human resolve. Every fallen comrade added fuel to the fire. A year after New Geneva, the last occupied human world was liberated. Admiral Chun stood on the surface of New Geneva itself, now a scarred and broken world, but free once more. Behind him, a crowd of soldiers and survivors watched as he planted a new flag in the ashes. The first phase of the war was over. Humanity had taken back what was theirs. But Chun knew the fight was not finished. As long as the Vreth existed, they would remain a threat. They would rebuild, regroup, and attack again. The only way to ensure humanity's safety was to end the threat completely. He turned to face his people, his officers, his soldiers. They had accomplished something impossible. They had remembered who they were and used that knowledge to save themselves. Now he would ask them to do something harder. The fleet would advance into Vreth space. They would find the enemy's homeworld. And they would make sure the Vreth could never threaten anyone again. The crowd did not cheer. They simply nodded. They understood what was being asked, and they accepted it. This was what humans did. This was what humans had always done. They survived, whatever the cost. The war ended not with a treaty or a surrender. It ended with silence. Human forces pushed deep into Vreth space, fighting through defenses that had held against other enemies for millions of years. The Vreth threw everything they had at the advancing fleet. They used weapons that burned planets and devices that tore holes in the fabric of space itself. But nothing stopped the human advance. Admiral Chun led the final assault on the Vreth homeworld. His fleet numbered in the thousands now, crewed by men and women who had been farmers, teachers, and scientists just 2 years before. They had become something else. They had become warriors, not through choice, but through necessity. No one outside the human fleet ever learned exactly what happened on that last day. The communications went dark. The sensors recorded nothing useful. When it was over, the Vreth homeworld was a dead rock, and the Vreth Dominion had ceased to exist. The Concord sent probes to investigate. None of them returned. After the third probe disappeared, they stopped sending them. In the aftermath, the galaxy tried to return to normal. Trade routes reopened. Diplomatic channels buzzed with messages. The elder races pretended that everything was the same as before. But everyone knew it was a lie. The Vreth had shown that the Concord's peace was fragile, and humanity had shown what they were willing to do to survive. The Galactic Council called a special session to discuss what they called the human question. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered in the Great Chamber on the Concord's capital planet. They debated for days. Some wanted to sanction humanity for violating the treaties against warfare. Others wanted to disarm them by force, to take away their weapons and return them to the peaceful species they had been before. Just to disarm them by force, to take away their weapons and return them to the peaceful species they had been before. Others wanted to the peaceful species they had been before. Few quiet voices suggested more permanent solutions. They were careful with their words, but the meaning was clear. Humanity had become dangerous. Perhaps too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo represented humanity at the session. She was a small woman with gray in her hair and deep lines around her eyes. She had lost 2 children on New Geneva. She had watched her species transform from peaceful citizens into hardened warriors. She had seen things that would haunt her until the day she died. When it was her turn to speak, she stood slowly and walked to the center of the chamber. The room fell silent. Every eye was on her. She spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but every word carried through the vast space. She thanked the Concord for taking humanity in all those years ago. She acknowledged the gifts they had given, the knowledge they had shared, the chance to be part of something greater than themselves. Humanity had been grateful. They had embraced peace with genuine hearts. Then she spoke of New Geneva. She described the attack, the deaths, the children taken as slaves. She told them about the fear that had gripped human space, the helplessness they had felt when they realized no one would save them. The Concord had taken peace from humanity, she said. Not the Vreth, the Concord. By convincing humanity to give up their weapons. By teaching them that violence was always wrong. The elder races had left humanity defenseless against the first real threat the galaxy had faced in thousands of years. She paused and looked around the chamber. The representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Humanity had remembered what they were. She continued. They had reached deep into their history and found the tools their ancestors had used to survive. They had become warriors again because they had no other choice. And they would never forget again. She delivered humanity's terms in a clear, steady voice. They would remain part of the Concord. They would trade, cooperate, and honor existing agreements. But they would also maintain their military. They would keep their weapons and their soldiers and their ships. They would never again trust others to protect them. This was not a threat, she said. It was a promise. Humanity did not want war. They had seen enough death to last 1,000 generations. But they understood now that peace was not just the absence of violence. Peace was the choice not to use the strength you possessed. And that choice, humanity would keep for themselves. The chamber remained silent long after she finished speaking. The elder races looked at each other, unsure how to respond. They had created the Concord to end war forever. They had believed that violence was a disease that could be cured through education and enlightenment. Now a young species, barely 300 years into their galactic journey, had shown them a truth they had forgotten. Peace was precious. But peace required strength to protect it. Humanity returned to their worlds and began rebuilding. They constructed new cities on New Geneva, monuments to the dead standing alongside homes for the living. They maintained their military, but hoped never to use it again. They raised their children to understand both the value of peace and the necessity of being able to defend it. The galaxy settled into an uneasy calm. The Concord continued, though it was never quite the same. The elder races no longer looked at humanity with pity or condescension. They looked at them with something closer to respect, tinged with fear, and somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, any species that might have thought about attacking. The Concord received word of what had happened to the Vreth. They learned about a young species that had been taught to forget violence and had remembered it in time to save themselves. They learned that humanity was awake. And they decided to stay far, far away.